What is up, YouTube? Coach Kolton here to bring you physique development tools, skills, and opinions that hopefully you can use for yourself to make some gains. Today in this video, I asked Instagram what cycles they'd like me to review. So I had quite a few people send in their cycles for review, and I figured I'd go through and answer kind of all these questions and what I think about their particular cycles. I am kind of surprised. A lot of these are pretty good and some seriously good questions too with the ratios of certain compounds. I will not waste any time and get through this. First one, I'm going to try my best with these Instagram names. Please forgive me. Ionamps, IONANPS. Says 40 milligrams of prop, 30 milligrams of mastron, 30 milligrams of tren, and 60 milligrams of stanazolol or winstrol, and then 6 IUs of GH daily. I just think that's a lot of pinning and a very high dose of trenbolone, to be honest. I think you can get away with even less than that. Personally, for me, when I'm injecting testosterone propionate, I always find that there's a lot of localized site injection pain, and that usually results in, for me at least, a lot of scar tissue buildup that I find consequentially bleeds itself into the next couple of months too. So I usually would prefer maybe more of a route with a longer estered hormone like testosterone and enanthate, and likewise with mastron, unless there is a specific reason in which you need it to be short acting, for instance like a drug test or something like that. But I just don't see a place in time for short-acting compounds like that. One could say like before peak week, which is understandable. So I guess it's like, what's the context in which you're using this? And then 60 milligrams of stanazolol. I guess again, it's kind of like, why? What are you using it for? If you're trying to build muscle, I don't think that's going to be effective for you at all, and you likely have zero estrogen on this cycle. I would probably recommend that instead of having 60 milligrams of stanazolol, you switch to a higher dose of testosterone, a higher dose of mastron, take out the trenbolone completely, and then stick with the 6 IUs of GH daily. I love high dose growth hormone. 6 to honestly 12 IUs is kind of the sweet spot for most people that I work with. We have Lucas 9422. His cycle is 400 milligrams of testosterone and 400 milligrams of mastron. He asks, is this ratio good enough? And he has currently no side effects, but also feels no different, as if he's not making any significant amount of progress or headway. I do think this is a good ratio. However, for some people, I find they're not that potent of aromatizers, and what can happen is ultimately their estrogen becomes too low through that, and that mechanism of estrogen being too low can lead to an ineffective response to hypertrophy, as well as a lot of health issues long term. And that might be part of the reason in which you're feeling maybe no different, is because a excessively low estrogen is sort of impeding the response from training, food, and all that other stuff, leading to like lessened insulin sensitivity, nitric oxide release, less pumps, that kind of stuff. So what I would say is maybe for you, increase, I usually say like a 1.5 ratio of testosterone. So like I would personally do 600 milligrams of testosterone and then 300 to 200 milligrams of mastron. I think that would be way more efficacious, in keeping that estrogen higher would probably be the best bet. Kolton.Fouquet's cycle, which is literally just 350 milligrams T, that's all he put. So I think what he is referring to is 350 milligrams a week, and I think that's a great cycle. And in fact, I preach this a lot. Something like 350 milligrams you can run for multiple years without stopping and make pretty linear progress across all of those years. You'll be in a super physiological range of testosterone. You don't need to get complicated and have deleterious health impacts, and like I said, you can run that almost indefinitely without seeing any negative outcomes for a very long time, as opposed to shooting doses up extremely high and then having to pull them back and then doing the same thing over and over again and having this like, there's no hormetic response, like you just get this terrible like wave of outlook. So I think it's a really good cycle. I would say that after that, I would look at implementing, to stay as healthy as possible, and I've made videos about this in the past, implementing something like insulin and growth hormone with that cycle to just kind of create a very fluid and sort of biologically identical cycle that's going to lead to really linear gains without any complications. Alex Nucla 17, 300 milligrams of testosterone and enanthate, 200 milligrams of primobolan, and 2 IUs of GH 7 days of the week. I think this is a great cycle. Again, very simple. You can run for an extended duration of time without having to stop. Should be very healthy. My big thing is that primobolan is likely fake in almost any country that you use it if it's not premium 100%. I've rarely seen real premium, and people are going to say, oh bullshit, my guy has it. And I'm like, all right, good. Like, test it every single batch you get and tell me how many batches are actually legit. It's probably not nearly as many as you think. And then 2 IUs of GH daily, I think that's great. But again, dependent on your goals, Alex, I would like to see that much higher. 2 IUs is awesome for like a replacement dose. I don't think it has any tangible effect in bodybuilding, possibly for lipolysis or fat loss. So if you want to lean out without really putting on a ton of size, there's some benefit there, but I don't think beyond that you're going to be experiencing much. So I would see that dose going up to 6, 8, 10 IUs if the goal is muscle building, and then maybe switching that primobolan out for something like Mastron. Femur God's cutting cycle is 175 milligrams of test and 50 milligrams of Anadrol, I'm assuming daily. That's pretty good. I honestly don't have much to say there. Anadrol is great. It's a non-hepatotoxic, unlike a lot of people think. It's not metabolized by the liver. It's actually primarily metabolized by the kidneys, and not in a negative way too, which would impact the kidneys. So it's a very good cycle. Amdayra's cycle, E 400 milligrams, NPP 200 milligrams per week. He's 22 years old. I think that's great. NPP, the only issue with it is that it is very potent at passing the blood-brain barrier and causing neurological damage. I would be very careful using 19-ORs at that age when the frontal cortex is still developing, because we do have pretty clear data that like trenbolone and other 19-ORs can cause like cortical thinning and have very deleterious long-term effects on your cognitive capacity. All right, sorry about that. My camera died and then I had to go to the gym immediately after, but we left off on the last one, which was the test an NPP at a 22-year-old age. Then there's so there's a lot of these. I'm gonna skip through a couple of them. One of them is Body by Gym Warrior, 250 SUST, and then 300 milligrams of primobolan. Again, as stated in the previous one, that was similar doses as this. I usually think that primobolan is almost always faked, so your best bet is to go with either Mastron or another compound. And then Sustanon, it's like I don't really see a need for it. Just get enanthates or acipionates, as you'll experience much less PIP, and in general, it's just going to be a more even distribution of blood serum concentrations, and you're going to end up better for it anyways. Another guy, Aladdin INF, says, could you review this? 800 milligrams of testosterone, 500 milligrams of DECA, 300 EQ, the hair safe bulk, as he says. Well, if it's a hair safe bulk, I wouldn't have testosterone as essentially the highest compound in the stack, because DHT from the testosterone will be the cause of hair loss. In fact, the theory is that if you use a DHT derivative, it's non-identical to DHT created from the metabolization of testosterone, so therefore it wouldn't cause as much hair loss as sheer DHT coming from testosterone. Now, you could ameliorate this by using a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor, but now the problem is that the non-5-alpha reduced version of DECA is much more androgenic for the hair line or the hair follicle than simply DECA and its 5-alpha reduced metabolites. So in theory, if you really wanted a hair safe bulk, what you would do is have a very low dose of testosterone, something of the likes of 125 to 150 milligrams a week, with a very higher dose of DECA, or ideally NPP, just in the event that you do end up with deleterious side effects. And then I would stay away from EQ and instead add something like a Mastron at a much lower dose as well. That should be pretty much safe for you and get you all the results you want. Now, another thing that I would do in this cycle is actually include estradiol, like oral estradiol, as a method to increase or maintain a high level of estrogen, as that estrogen is going to be preferable to maintain antioxidant status, thus a better hair follicle. The same guy, Aladdin INF, asks 1 gram of testosterone and 200 grams of Mastron. So again, if you're looking for a hair safe cycle, this isn't it for sure. But in general, I would actually like to see 1 gram of test, even 500 to 800 milligrams of Mastron. I generally think test is best. Run it as high as you can for the longest amount of time. Don't use anything else unless you need it for whatever particular reason, and that rocks. So 1 gram of test to me sounds great. 200 milligrams of Mastron, it's kind of mute. Maybe increase that dose quite a bit. Otherwise, this is a great cycle. Aladdin INF asks, is DHB hair safe, or at least as safe as DECA? So hypothetically, on paper it should be, but it doesn't end up being that way. Dihydroboldenone actually ends up seeing, at least from my array of clients and myself, being much more androgenic than anything else. I have not lost more hair on any other compound rather than DHB, gotten more acne, gotten more prostate issues, etc. So I wouldn't say it's a safe compound, and in general you're going to cause a lot of deleterious effects to your organ systems on DHB rapidly, and that in and of itself, oxidative stress going up systemically, will dramatically increase rates of hair loss. Chronic catabolism asks, is 800 to 1,000 milligrams of testosterone, 300 to 600 milligrams of DECA, 100 to 200 milligrams of Tren, 25 milligrams of Anavar, 25 milligrams of Superdrol, last 4 to 6 weeks, and then 5 to 12 Humalog pre and post workouts. And I'm assuming last 4 to 6 weeks he's implementing this as a show competition or a prep cycle. So generally speaking, 800 to 1,000 milligrams of testosterone. Again, as previously mentioned, I love testosterone. Run it as high as you can to tolerate it for the longest amount of time. For me, DECA wouldn't have a place in a pre-show scenario, especially if you're also concurrently running Tren with it. Using Tren and DECA simultaneously is typically where I see the negative effects that people talk about from 19 Nor's happen concurrently. So I ideally wouldn't have that, and in fact, if I'm in a prep, I would use that 800 to 1,000 test, plus actually 800 to 1,000 mast run, plus about 100 milligrams of Tren. That would be, for me, the sweet spot in a prep. Now the Anavar, highly useful. I love Anavar pre-workout, especially because it increases contractile capacity. Very great deal. So especially in a prep when carbohydrates are low and in general strength production is not where it used to be, Anavar can be that extra little tick in your notch of the belt to say, hey, let's fucking push some weight and retain the numbers that you're pushing in the off season. Now, Superdrol, however, is not ideal. It's so hepatotoxic and deleterious to your health. I wouldn't run something like Superdrol for more than 4 days. Yes, that's right, 4 days. And that is pre-show. So if you're stepping on stage in about 4 days time, it might be a good agent to increase nitrogen retention as well as a little bit of glycogen retention so that you have a fuller appearance. But we're talking about, a 5% change here, and for most people that's not going to make a big difference. And the Humalog pre and post workout, love that. That is great. Ideally keep that in. Using testosterone, insulin, and growth hormone, the best way to grow indefinitely. Same individual asking, chronic catabolism asking, 800 milligrams of test, 600 EQ, 500 DECA, 100 Tren, 2 to 3 IUs of GH, and 5 to 10 IUs Humalog pre and post workout. Again, I think this is a good cycle. One of my favorite combos actually is testosterone, EQ, and DECA, to be honest with you. Tren, I don't think you need unless it is a special circumstance. If you wanted to have Tren because it's some kind of psychological thing for you, and for some people it is, I would say add in 25 milligrams a week, and that's literally only 25 milligrams. I would personally bump the growth hormone up again to 6 to 10 units ideally, and then the Humalog pre and post, love that. Don't change that at all. That's perfect. You can even escalate those doses if you need to, depending on where calories are at and what contextually you're doing within that year. For me, I would ideally love to push insulin as high as I can, along with growth hormone, along with testosterone, and then the EQ and DECA would be sort of additives to that mix in a good way. Mock Buys 23 asks, 250 milligrams of test, 200 milligrams of Tren, and 5 IU fast-acting insulin before huge carb meals, 2 to 3. He is a power lifter at 94 kilograms, so he's a bigger dude. Yeah, I mean that would pretty much work, especially for pushing physical load. The trenbolone will be really helpful for sure. The fast-acting insulin would be really beneficial for that, especially in enhancing motor skill learning too. Especially post-workout, using a large bolus of insulin can be very potent at stimulating, I guess, refinement or solidification of the motor skills that you just developed in a training session. So I love that. That's really good. I would consider adding in, possibly Anavar as an oral. I love Anavar for powerlifters. I think it's very effective and, again, low risk to using it in general compared to most other compounds. But I think this is a really good cycle. I think adding Anavar would be really good. And then in general, mass moves mass, so adding compounds that would further increase a retentive state, so something like growth hormone would usually be a good idea here too, and that's something I would implement ASAP. Vincent Den Ragers, I'm sorry if I'm butchering these names, asks 350 milligrams of test cypionate, 250 milligrams of deca, 200 milligrams of mastron and enanthate, 4 IUs of GH, and 20 IUs of Lantus, and might dabble in some IGF-1 LR3 later on. All of this I love. I really do enjoy this cycle here. So again, I would, instead of having like a bunch of little things, and I know this is kind of contrary to the safer use model, I would actually prefer you, again, run that test as high as you plausibly can, add mastron secondarily to that, and then you can dabble in deca if you need to. But I would sincerely consider getting testosterone as high as you can tolerate it. And of course, 350 milligrams may be that for you, but man, I usually see that people can tolerate much, much more. And then mastron can offset the excess estrogen, so you can even push things a little bit further. And then once you've kind of tapped out those reserves and you're at, a gram or even more of testosterone, likewise mastron too, then deca is a good additive. So it takes a while to get to that point. Again, I'm going to repeat this. 4 IUs of GH, I don't think it's worth your time. I'm going to be very real here. 6 to 10 IUs is the sweet spot, and people are going to say I'm ludicrous for saying that, but until you've tried it consistently for 3 months, you'll know what the fuck I'm talking about. And then 20 IUs of Lantus, love it. Lantus is one of my favorite compounds in anybody's off season, either powerlifters, strongmen, or bodybuilders, and I truly think it has a very large spectrum of uses. So it's great, obviously, because it's going to improve nitric oxide synthase, and it's also going to improve the prophylactic protection of your pancreas, which is super awesome. And in general, putting that, like considering insulin a straw to a cell and having that cell suck up all the glucose, amino acid, and nitrogen within the blood, perfect, right? That's a perfect scenario for growth. And then I do really sincerely love IGF-LR3. I think it's very potently effective if used appropriately. Tricky thing is a lot of people use it incorrectly, and it doesn't need to be used in lots of doses. It does need to be administered pre-workout bilaterally, and it can have a really great effect, especially when combined with GH and Lantus at high doses. So Ethan Dempers asks, 250 milligrams of testosterone and enanthate split into 3 administrations weekly, so I'm assuming he means 450 divided by 3, and then 300 milligrams of mastron split into 3 times weekly, 25 milligrams of Anadrol pre-workout. Love all of that. I would increase the testosterone, I would drop the Anadrol. Anadrol is going to kill your appetite, it's going to kill your hepatic system, and in general, I think it's going to have a much greater area under curve of risk than any of the other compounds you could be using, especially as it relates to hair loss, especially as it relates to gynecomastia. Be very careful with Anadrol. I don't think it's useful. I think in a bodybuilder's program, Anadrol has no use. I would say that 450 milligrams could be increased to 650 milligrams, and then the 300 milligrams of mastron could be increased to like 350 milligrams of mastron, and then just take the Anadrol out, so you're basically replacing the androgenic load of the Anadrol with testosterone and mastron, and you'll be way better off. Here comes Johnny, asks 375 milligrams of testosterone and enanthate, 150 milligrams of equipoise, which is his first bulk cycle. You guys already know what I'm about to say. I want to see testosterone as high as we can possibly get it. For your first cycle, if this is your first cycle, I don't know if maybe you did one prior to this, I would be running testosterone only. I would start at a very low dose of testosterone, something like 200 milligrams, escalate from 200 to 375, kind of where you're at, cross an entire year, like take a very long time with that dose, then get really friendly with it at the end of that year. Kind of assess the progress being made. If you're making really good progress, keep fucking going. Don't stop. 375 milligrams of test is not going to harm your health. Then you can bump up to maybe 500 milligrams of test if you're tolerating it well. Then, let's say estrogenic issues become a thing, implement a mastron. Implement a other adjunct to DHT that will help suppress aromatase activity. That would be my go-to. I wouldn't use equipoise if you're going to concurrently use a low dose of testosterone. I would just increase the testosterone overall, use that androgen load just towards testosterone, and then displace the rest with a DHT derivative like mastron ideally. Okay, we have a very long one here by Drake Emery. He has a lot to say. I'm just gonna read the whole thing and I'm gonna reply to it. Started at 500 started at 500 milligrams of test, 500 milligrams of primobolan. E2 is non-existent, so he moved to 600 milligrams of test and 400 milligrams of primobolan and 200 milligrams of boldenone cypionate after donating bloods. 8 IUs of GH, love that. Novolin pre Humalog post, along with 500 milligrams of L-carnitine pre-workout, and using GHRP6 on high days. Peak off season 240/80 says, doing about cardio 15 minutes 4 times a week. Very honest about my body fat, still had abs, but too many people think they're 12% bulking. Well, yeah, so this is pretty damn good. There's a couple things, okay? So with EQ not being present, estrogen not being present, I probably wouldn't have added EQ. Again, just reinserting this every single place I can. Run the testosterone as high as you can manage it, which it sounds like you can manage it pretty high if you're seeing non-existent E2 at just 1-to-1 ratio of testosterone and primobolan. So what would I have done instead of taking the primobolan down? I would have bumped the testosterone up double, to 1,000 milligrams per week, kept the primobolan at 500 milligrams per week. E2 would have moved back within physiological range. You would have a net benefit because 1, E2 being higher, 2, having a higher androgen load would push that growth response much, much faster. The 8 IUs of GH, perfect, leave it there, it's great. The Novolin pre and Humalog post, I think that's great. I would just take the Novolin out, assuming that's Novolin R from Walmart. I would just replace it with Humalog. I think Novolin's just a prehistoric compound as far as insulin goes. Humalog is going to be king because of its controllability and timing, and ideally we get more of a calculated effect. Whereas Novolin R is pretty uncalculated and wildly sporadic. It's why it's the cheapest and most readily available hormone to get for diabetics. And then the 500 milligrams of L-carnitine pre-workout, love that. I don't think that needs to change at all. I would put that in myself. I do put that in myself. Just about. I'd do 600 milligrams from Chase Irons. If you guys want, go to Chase Irons' website. He has L-carnitine. I do have a discount code, but it doesn't give me any kickback. It's Gym Juice is the discount code in all caps. GHRP6, throw that shit in the trash. Doesn't do anything for you. I think it's completely worthless. Instead, what I would do is use something that's going to systemically increase IGF-1, which would be insulin, such as Lantus, as opposed to the 2 short-acting compounds that you're using previously. I would use Lantus as that has a actual very potent response in increasing IGF-1, and forget about the GHRP6, save your money and spend it elsewhere on more testosterone or primobolan or growth hormone, being real with you. And that's all you'll need to grow, man. I would say take the stupid shit out like GHRP6, the Novolin, put more Humalog in, put more testosterone in, and you'll be golden. Kolton asks, that's right, he has the same name as me, but spelt with a C, so it's bullshit, it's not the same. 300 milligrams of test and 100 milligrams of Mastron per week, done with daily microinjections. So I love the microinjections, think that's very beautiful. Hard to get people to adhere to, so whenever I see people doing it, I really appreciate it because I don't fucking adhere to that shit, to be honest with you. So I love that, that's really cool. 300 milligrams of test, 100 milligrams of Mastron. Here's kind of where I have a problem. I think you could probably go 400 milligrams of testosterone and see a net neutral effect. Like you're going to have the same results over a longer period of time, less of an impact on your lipids, and in general, you're going to get more estrogen, which can be a positive effect as E2 is slightly anabolic as well. Then if estrogen becomes an issue, that's where you would throw on the 100 milligrams of Mastron. I think people just blatantly put in Mastron because it's like what everyone's kind of been preached to do, which is great, and I think that's effective, but I don't think it's super necessary if you don't truly need it. Deadbird asks, test Primo, CJC, and ipamorelin. CJC, ipamorelin, throw that shit in the trash. Doesn't do a fucking thing for you. Get real GH, you'll be good to go. Zach Odom asks, 300 milligrams of test for the first 3 weeks, then 500 milligrams of test and Anavar for about 5 to 4 weeks. Test cycle was about 16 weeks total. I would ask why you didn't run that for 30, 40, 50 weeks. 300 milligrams of testosterone is nothing. You could have just kept that on forever, like an entire year, and made linear progress. And then you could have left the Anavar out too and not needed that. It was kind of irrelevant. I personally would do 300 milligrams. Again, if it's your starting cycle, of course. 300 milligrams, 12, 15 months, no shit. You're not going to experience any deleterious health effects. Do your blood work to make sure. Do organ imaging. Be a smart nut. but I guarantee you most people, almost 99% of people, are not going to experience deleterious health effects from 300 milligrams of testosterone for a year. And in fact, they'll experience linear progress without any of the shit that other people are dealing with, using way too high dose protocols way too soon out the gate. Tom Beck lifts 300 milligrams of test, 25 milligrams of Anavar, recomping very well on low calories. So that's great. You know, I think depending on your goals and what your situation is, that's actually a really good cycle. I like Anavar in a deficit because, like I mentioned before, it improves neurological capacity to drive mechanical tension, mechanical force, and it also seems to reduce truncated fat. There's not really a mechanism behind this that is proposed. Some people think that it's some form of uncoupling that happens when you take Anavar, but I just generally think that Anavar has a potent effect at somehow liberating fatty acids around that midsection. So I do like the idea of having Anavar. And testosterone at a lower dose seems to be effective for you. You're mentioning that you're recomping very well at lower calories. So I think that's awesome. Now, I would consider the fact that as calories continue to get lower and as body fat continues to get lower, increasing doses might be a viable option. And I would do that via increasing either Masteron, if you can have it, or testosterone if you're not having any estrogenic issues. And if your body fat is low enough, you shouldn't be. So I would just increase testosterone. And the last one, I'm so sorry this video has been tremendously long, but I love it. Excuse me for butchering this name. Yigi Tragruhan, and I'm sorry I forgot that wrong, brother. 400 milligrams of testosterone propionate, 1,000 milligrams of Masteron propionate, 300 milligrams of tren acetate, 4 IUs Pharma GH, 30 milligrams Anavar contest prep. So I can see what he's doing here. The theory is let's nuke estrogen by keeping testosterone relatively low and the DHT derivative really, really high. And the 300 milligrams of trenbolone, you know, again, just sort of as a recomping agent. I'm curious as to how far he is out from the contest. So I really wouldn't be implementing anything like this extreme. Estrogen has a very potent effect at causing lipolysis. It will aid you in fat loss, and it will improve insulin sensitivity, and it will improve slow wave sleep, which are all very important things when it relates to fat loss. The thing that people most often do is nuke estrogen right out the gate, thinking that that has some sort of magical fat loss property. You want to keep estrogen as high as possible for as long as possible until you start to see those lower extremities, glutes, hamstrings, lower back become an issue with fat loss. And then that is where you can strategically get that estrogen down. And you can either do that one of two ways. I like to do it in the fashion that he is, where he's lowering testosterone, increasing the DHT derivative. But other people might use an AI and just completely nuke their estrogen, and that's fine too. It works. Not as healthy as this option possibly. So if he's relatively close to the show, I think this is a great cycle. I would say that you could probably deal without as much tren, because ideally you could sleep better, you could have less cognitive negative effects, and get more bang for your buck, right? You're not spending as much money on stupid ass amounts of tren, and you can save some money to put into more GH, right? Ideally, I'd like to see that 4 IUs of GH brought up to 6, 8, 10. So maybe if you could reduce the tren in half, still get the same effect, and increase GH by 2 units, you're going to make much more progress that way as opposed to having more tren in the situation. The 30 milligrams of Anavar, again, as previously mentioned, I enjoy. It increases strength. It has this interesting effect of causing liberation of fatty acids around that truncated area. So that would be effective too. Overall, this cycle is very good. I think the only critique I would have is depending on where he is, I would actually like to see estrogen a little bit higher if he's in the beginning stages of prep. If he's in the ending stages of prep, I think this is actually really, really good. I would just reduce the tren and increase the growth hormone, and then possibly think about actually adding in another compound as opposed to throwing in Anavar. Actually, skip that. I think Anavar is great in here. I was going to say maybe depending on how close he is, he could add in Superdrol or maybe even Anadrol to increase fullness. He looks like a pretty fucking full guy, to be honest, out the gate, so I don't think it's super necessary, but yeah, generally I think this is a good cycle. This is definitely, you know, a lot of people think that high doses like this are terrible for you, but this is actually a pretty legit cycle. The only thing I would change is really, depending on how far he is out, reduce that trenbolone down to 150. You don't need 300 milligrams, I promise. You'll get the same effect from 150. You'll get the same effect from 100 more than likely. So that is, that's all the reviews, guys. I hope that was insightful. there's a lot of cycles and a lot of dudes running gear. So I'm glad to see, you know, we're not the only ones out here doing shit. So if you guys have anything else you'd like me to talk about, please comment down below, like, subscribe, and send this to your friends to let them know what I think about their cycles if they're running a similar cycle. Please comment down below if you want me to cover any more content. I will see you in the next video. Deuces.